Right, good afternoon members and officers. Welcome to the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee meeting for Monday the 28th of April. Just a quick reminder of formalities. Firstly, there are no scheduled fire alarms, so in the event of an emergency or in the event of an alarm, it'll be genuine and serious, and we will need to make our way out of the building in an orderly fashion and assemble in the entrance to War Memorial Park. Remind you all that this meeting is being webcast, so best behaviour please. Receive apologies for absence. I have one from Councillor Leake, and he is being replaced by Councillor Bean. I've got one from Councillor Mitchell, who will be late, but nonetheless will make it. Councillor Harvey.
And one from Councillor Keating. Unfortunately, his granddaughter's broken her ankle, and so he's seeing grandfather duties.
Yes, I bet he's enjoying that. I'm going to say yes. Unfortunately, these things happen. There we go. I guess that's the best. Have to sign her cast, no doubt. Yes. Right, we've done resignations, replacements by default. Declarations of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. Does anyone have anything for me? No. Obviously, if anything creeps up during the course of the meeting, just let us know. Urgent items, we have none. And that takes us on to paper A, the minutes of the 24th of February. Do I have any comments, questions, queries? Or can I sign them on your behalf? No. Looks like agreed. Yep. Thank you. Member and public participation. I have none notified, and I don't see anyone here. Standing invitation to relevant portfolio holders. Likewise, no one here, and I haven't been notified anything. Before I nip into the next item, I just want to draw attention to a couple of things that we would ordinarily schedule at this time of the year, and I know that the next audit committee meeting in June will have some challenges in terms of composition, because it will probably have changed by then. Nonetheless, I do need to put on notice that there are anyone considering being a member of the committee in future needs to take account of the fact that before that committee meeting on the 30th of June, we would necessarily need to arrange some induction training, particularly on the audit and financial management requirements of this committee. We would also need to arrange for members of this committee, not all members, but at least 3 members of the committee, to meet with the new fund managers in respect of the investment strategy. So again, if you're considering remaining on the committee, that's something that also will be scheduled for the latter part of June. Similarly, we would look to arrange a session on the draft governance statement. If you remember last year, we ran through the governance statement in June before then coming through to the September session. So it works well if we have the opportunity to discuss what it's about, what it means, and how we approach that before we just get presented with the papers at committee. So 3 particular elements there we would need to look for members to express interest in, or indeed if you have colleagues who are thinking of coming on this committee, you need to make them aware of. Any thoughts or on that at the moment, or just no? Just happy to be aware of the forward plan of work. And yeah, and of course it is outside of the normal committee meeting, so it will take a draw on your time, but nonetheless a very important draw, so we are as a committee fully aware of our responsibilities and able to discharge them. Thank you for that indulgence. That takes me on to item 10, and this is referral from full council. As the paper sets out, the resolution at full council in respect of ethical principles was referred back to this committee to explore and take further forward. At this time, I don't expect to have a real discussion or debate on the matter. I'm simply looking for members to expressed their interest in being part of a subcommittee of ARGA to take this matter further forward, working with officers, accepting that, what I've just said about the committee changing in composition perhaps in June. But can I take any nominations now, people who wish to be involved in that? Quite strangely, Councillor Parker, I thought you might put your hand up. Is there anyone else who would wish to put themselves forward? Okay, Councillor Harvey as well. Yeah, it absolutely would be helpful to be cross-party, yes. Yeah.
Shouldn't we actually ask for representatives who are going to stick it rather than alternates from the same group?
Like I say, I think it's in our interests to try and take nominations now, assuming people will wish to take this forward. Because again, we've got time between now to at least to arrange one meeting to talk about the terms of reference. That will be a helpful start if you're okay with that. Yep. Councillor.
I'm really commenting on Paul's remark. If not him, he'd like a Labour member to do it. I was hoping that didn't mean there'd be a different member at each meeting.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Harvey.
No, I totally appreciate what Keith is saying. This side of the annual council meeting, I'd like to do it, and I'm very happy to do it. The other side of the council meeting is not within my gift, is it? It's within the group's gift as to who they appoint. But I will ask, and I will seek to continue, because I'd like to. I want to support both of you in what you do.
And I suppose there'd be no surprise then that I'd nominate myself to be the Conservative representative on that group for now. And again, subject to what happens next. Councillor Parker.
And I second your nomination.
Thank you. Okay, so I think the commitment we've got there is to at least have an informal meeting and look at the terms of reference and take the first steps forward, and then define how we come back to this committee in the future. Thank you. That takes me to item 11, issues referred by Cabinet, of which there are none. And then we come on to our recurring item 12, use of regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, affectionately entitled WIPA. I'm just going to read this as it says on the paper. The committee is requested to note that since the last meeting of the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, there have been no requests or authorisations granted for the following. That is, directed surveillance or covert human intelligence source. Okay, is that noted? Thank you. That takes us on to item 13, paper B. This is the table that Mrs. Taylor usually runs through with us. Fairly self-explanatory, and indeed a number of the items still working in progress are now covered by the Constitutional Working Party and the changes in the Constitution. So do I have any questions or comments on this paper at the moment? No. Can we just note it then, please?
Yes, noted.
Thank you. That takes me on to item 14 and paper C. So if I can ask you to introduce this, please, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I bring to the committee the internal audit plan for this financial year, as well as the internal audit charter, which I'm both going to ask for both to be approved by the committee. Just a couple of pointers on the reports. This year we've got an internal audit charter which has replaced the internal audit terms of reference and internal audit strategy that used to be presented to members. It's new guidance in terms of the public sector internal audit standards. It's replacing the SIPFA standard. I'd also like to draw your attention to paragraph 3.4 of my report, which can be found on page 18 of 53. I'd just like to mention that a few months ago, Hart District Council approached Basingstoke and Dean to ask if we could assist them in completing their audit plan for this financial year. I've spoken to the Head of Resources, the Chief Financial Officer, to ensure that there'd be no impact on the internal audit plan as far as Basingstoke's concerned, and we're happy that we can accommodate the request. So as you'll see in paragraph 343, I've listed the audits that we'll be doing for Hart District Council, and we'll be charging them £22,500 for that work, which I think is useful in terms of partnerships for Basingstoke and particularly for internal audit. If I can now quickly take you to paragraph 10, which is on page 22 of page 22 and page 23. I've listed again the definitions that were used for the recommendations that we use in our internal audit reports through the year, as well as the categories for assurance that we give for each audit assignment. Those definitions are exactly the same as last year. So if you're happy with what we did last year, hopefully you'll be happy with what we got here this year. And finally, I'd just like to take to page 26 of 53, which is the internal audit plan, which is the list of the assignments we're going to do. And you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th bullet point under other key audits. I have information management, and that's looking at the archiving situation at Basingstoke, because it's something the audit committee raised in the November meeting. So just to demonstrate, that's in the report, in the audit plan for you. I will ask for approval from the committee for both documents, but happy to take any comments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, can I firstly say this really helpful, plain, simple, well set out paper, and the flow charts help no end as well. So any questions, please? Councillor Gardner first.
Thank you, Paul. I've just got one question, which was on the Hart District Council. You say you have the resources available. How many man days is actually involved?
It'll be 115.
If we put 115 days available, what were they doing last year?
I knew this was coming. I have two resources that deal with the fraud side, the reactive fraud and proactive fraud. I'm going to be using an element of those resources. There's my time. I will be taking on a couple of audits myself to get my hands dirty again. And if we need to, we do have the £22,500 available. So if we get to that situation where we really need to do it, I might dip into £5,000-10,000 of that, but we'll still ensure that we come out with a profit in terms of Basingstoke and Dean.
Councillor Parker.
It was very close to my own concerns, and so I have one part already answered, but just to clarify, that was 115 days is the projected extra workload. You were saying there's no requirement to take on additional staff, or at least not known yet, but then the intention would be to use the banked money. Well, for me it looks like bargain of the year, is what I would say, when you look at the number of audits that are going to be carried out. So it sounds arrogant to be challenging your calculations and the head of finance, but to me that looks like a lot of work. Part of the concern we had when we were reviewing the internal audit report on other departments of the council's business was potentially work getting behind and projects that were being required, information on response to criticisms not being either answered or not being changed or remedied. I have to say I'm a bit concerned, is all I would say. I do definitely hope that our internal audit work doesn't suffer as a result.
I take my slide straight to be off questions there then, but I'll allow that given we have the time to do so. Councillor Harvey, you have a question for us?
Well, thank you. Just to endorse what Stuart's just said, really, but also my question relates to Appendix 2 on the list. The one bit that's missing, and you may have referred to this indirectly in terms of your work programme, but specifically the malls and the motion that went through council in regard to internal audit examining the malls and having an investigation come through this body or the future audit committee.
Yes, thank you. My team have already done the report for the malls. It's in draft format at this moment. I just need to review it, but it will be being presented to audit committee on the 30th of June.
Any more questions? Councillor Gardner again.
Thank you. If you have the opportunity to look at the systems that Hart are carrying out as part of the audit, is there any opportunity for you to report back on any lessons that can be learnt from how other people are operating?
Yes, one of the intentions from my point of view is not only are we receiving the £22,500, but we can also see how Hart are doing things compared to us. So if we're doing a procurement audit, for example, and we see that Hart are doing it better than we are, we can hopefully take the best parts of their processes to feed them into our process. So again, they should hopefully feature in each of the internal audits that we do and are reported back to committee.
If we have no other questions, do you wish to have any debate or discussion, members? No? Okay. I think that was a well-received report, and whilst I note the general concerns of the committee that it doesn't impact our workload, then I think generally carry on the good work. Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask for formal approval of both documents, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the prompt. Takes us on to paper D, local audit and accountability. And is this one for you, Kevin? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report updates the committee on some new legislation. A lot of the detailed regulations have not been finalised yet, but the new legislation is the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, which came into play at the end of January. The key thing for the Audit Committee in terms of this Act is around the future appointment of the external auditor. So the report goes through the requirements gives a bit of background on the audit framework, because the Audit Commission has been abolished by the Act, and various bodies are taking over aspects of the Audit Commission's work, including the National Audit Office at national level. But the key point for the committee is from 3.7 onwards around the appointment of the future appointment of external auditor. The Act enables this council to make appointments itself in the future of the external auditor, but subject to the Act and the various regulations, and one of the key elements being the need to set up an independent panel of audit, or an audit panel, to make that recommendation to full council on the appointment of the external auditor. And there's various regulations about what constitutes an independent member of that panel, but basically it's an independent person or independent people who are not members or officers or related to or previously within 5 years members or officers. So there is that element of the future. The regulations also allow the council to opt into any national procurement that might be arranged. So the LGA, for example, might organise some national procurement. And again, if the council opts into that, there isn't a need to appoint an auditor panel. You can buy into that procurement and select the auditors from that. Or the council could in the future work with other councils in Hampshire or elsewhere and set up a joint audit panel and use that to appoint the external auditors or to run the procurement. So the Act really just highlights those elements. The start date for us will be for the 2017-18 audit, which means the council will have to have appointed auditors by 31st of December 2016. And the report highlights the fact that a lot of the regulations are still not finalised yet. When they are, we'll be producing a further report for the committee, because the council and the committee will need to determine which procurement route it wishes to follow for the future appointment of its auditors. Thank you.
So, first off, any questions, members? No. Councillor Parker.
Yes, I'd just like to ask whether on that issue, which is covered on page 32 of 53, paragraph 377, will there be some sort of officer recommendation in relation to which would perhaps be the most prudent route to go, whether to appoint or defer until 2020-21?
Yes, Chair, I think we would as I envisage it, we would do an options report for the committee with a recommendation, obviously for the committee to look at that options report, but that would be how we would do it.
Anything further? No, Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, it wasn't a question, just a comment. Right.
and I won't be here. I'm glad to know. You'll be very glad to know.
Keep telling us that.
Yes, I keep hoping it's going to happen. I just keep coming back every time I think it's the last meeting. It occurs to me, I don't want to be controversial about it, but the history of this sort of thing is that auditors who audit councils are specialists at auditing councils, which is understandable because they understand how the system works. It seemed to me that as and when we have the opportunity to make such decisions, we should be seeking to have an audit team which includes some expertise from outside the local authority sphere, sees how the real world operates and challenges, is prepared to challenge the accepted practices of local authorities, some of which are embedded in history, and some which are perverse, in my opinion. And you know, it's not the time to go into the detail of that, but one would go into it if you ever saw an auditor who wasn't himself steeped in or herself steeped in local authority business. But I just want to make that point for the record.
Thank you, Jeff. Just come back up, just mention one point for information for committee. Obviously, there will be private sector auditors or audit firms, but there will be a maintained list that's maintained centrally of approved auditors that can audit the public sector, and the council will only be able to select from within that universe of private sector auditors.
Yes, my point was in negotiating with a particular firm, it's wanting to stop us in asking them to make sure they include some hard-nosed person from the real world in their expert local authority team, and the fact that you can only appoint from within a list that's of people who know all about local authority is exactly makes my point. That I think is the great weakness of the system.
A fair comment, duly noted. Any other comments on this paper, members? No, can we just note the paper? Thank you very much. Takes us on to paper E, the single fraud investigation service. There's lots of change happening that we're not in control of. I fear this is another one of them. So, Kevin, do you want to take us through this one as well?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this report again is for information for the committee, fairly, for central government anyway, fast-moving agenda. The last year's autumn statement in December 2013 announced the government's intention to set up a single fraud investigation service, and that will deal with all of the fraud investigations for the welfare, so housing benefits, council, the legacy council tax benefit system. What this means, that's a national, it was in the budget announcements, it's a national policy. What it means for the council and for all councils is that staff involved in that work will transfer to the DWP in a phased programme of activity. We don't know yet at what point between October this year and 31st of March 2016 that we will be in the process for staff transfer, but we expect to be notified of that by the end of, should be the end of this month. So the report just takes you through some of the background of that, some of the issues, and the intention of government is that the relevant staff will transfer to the DWP, and that work will no longer be carried out by local authorities. Local authorities will remain, and obviously will still have anti-corporate fraud, other non-welfare fraud to deliver, and there's some concerns about how that will be resourced for councils going forward, and the report outlines that. It also outlines that we have 2 full-time equivalent posts involved in fraud work, of which we anticipate about 1 full-time equivalent is involved in the welfare types of work that will be transferred. So really it's just for information for members, the latest position.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Parker?
Thank you, Chair. At some stage, I'd like to better understand the comment on paragraph 3.5, page 35 of 53, where the Department of Work and Pensions has determined that TUPE will not apply. And I note that they say that this is because regulations state the transfer of administrative staff functions between public administrative authorities is not a relevant transfer. seems very convenient to me. It's a nice little bit of sidestepping. Whenever we hear about staff transfers, this is the point where we need Councillor Keating around the table, because always the big fear is that that means a loss of perhaps benefit rights and continued rights and so forth. For them to be saying it will be 2p-like is, you know, I would like to understand better what regulation they're actually referring to. We have a note to it in the report, but I think if it's at all challengeable, we should challenge it.
I think at 3.9 you see that the council, certainly 3.91, I think you can see that we are indeed challenging it, and I think we're not on our own as a local authority doing so. I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that, Kevin?
Very briefly, Chair, if you're okay with that, just to say yes, most councils are making the same response as we are, that we believe that TUPE should apply. The government is ploughing ahead. They are consulting on, and those responses came from us in response to the draft regulations that they're producing, as they're intending to move ahead with that as a Secretary of State regulation that moves, in their eyes, staff from one element of the administrative public sector to central government. So we believe TUPE should apply. They're very clear in that it doesn't apply under the regulations. But they are drafting regulations that they believe are TUPE-like. But as you say, that's often in the interpretation, and it's not clear yet exactly what that will mean for the relevant staff. But it's an issue across the whole of the public sector, the local authority public sector.
Yes, thank you for that. I did have a note that we'd expressed in strong concerns. Can I just ask, have we yet had a response?
I don't believe we have yet, no.
Can I just ask, how long have we been waiting for one?
Well, the consultation is only just closed. I think it was the 14th of April it's closed, so we're expecting to hear very shortly. As I say, they're looking to progress this through this financial year, some of the transfers, so they need the regulation in place very quickly, because the first sets of transfers in the pilot areas would occur, I think, before the summer, and then the others will start from October.
Good. Did I see your hand, Councillor Watts, earlier? And then I'll come to Councillor Harvey. Thank you.
Well, mine wasn't a question, Chairman, which is why I withdrew the hand, but may I make my comments? Yeah. It's just an observation. I'm very pleased that if this service is going to be centralised, it's being centralised in a ministry. I would be very wary if it was going to be a new Quango. And as a ministry, it means that ministers can be required to answer questions in the House of Commons or House of Lords about its conduct. I think we should be very wary of seeing this being subsequently quangoed or even outsourced, but as it's recommended, I'm reasonably content.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Similarly, I share Councillor Watt's reservations about where the service might wind up. In terms of where this leaves us, what I'm worried about is the individuals involved in this. I know Councillor Cotter and other colleagues on HR have raised the issues from their perspective, and I know that our HR department and the Council has expressed strong reservations. I'd quite like to see this committee share those. It's a paper that's been put before us, and I think we should express similarly our concerns. We obviously have them thus far around the table in the conversation we're having. So, Chair, I'd like to recommend that a letter or something from yourself either echoes what's already been said or refers to members' alarm. It's not just the officers and it's not just the administration, it's members of this council, I think, have got concern, and I think that's important to capture. I am worried about the individuals involved in this and where they're left in terms of representation, because it isn't just simply the council involved in this. You know, they have rights and we have responsibilities to them in terms of their representation in this respect of their jobs and where they might wind up. So that concerns me. And my other point really relates to the service implications of this. Obviously, it's about centralising it. There is still a role for this local authority that hasn't gone away. So are we going to wind up losing experienced members of staff to a central body? Admittedly, it may be a ministry, and I respect what Councillor Watt says, but then nonetheless have to replace those members of staff in a different way, or look to reorganise ourselves in a different way to carry on with a particular kind of service that we still see we need. I don't know where that sits and where the thoughts have gone on that, but for me, it's a bit of a mess, to be perfectly honest. And here we go again with the DWP. I don't know whether Kevin's got a feeling about that in terms of where it leaves the service, perhaps looking forward.
I mean, we're anticipating that we will still have a fraud resource that will be able to undertake the fraud work, but there is, and I think I've put in the report, there is a real risk around loss of experience in that. Particularly as the council will still be, in terms of the timetable, the council will still be responsible for administering some of the housing benefits, because universal credit won't be in at the point at which the transfer occurs, but the fraud work will be being done by the DWP at that point. So there's a bit of a timing concern about how they will work on the ground. Also, we currently get support for some of that fraud, those fraud posts through housing benefit admin subsidy. That will be reducing. We don't know quite how or to what extent, but all we know is it will be reducing in 15-16. There is potentially some one-off funding, but again, that will just be one-off for councils to help with that capacity issue, because that was an issue that all councils have raised. Well, we've still got anti-fraud responsibilities as a council. How are we going to resource those, given that lots of councils use the combined service? So I think those are real issues that at the moment we flagged. We will have a resource that we think we'll be able to deliver, but we will need to see how some of the funding is going to pan out, and it is a concern.
I guess on the back of that, Kevin, my wider concern, and I know from a Labour group point of view we've spoken about this, and I'm sure other colleagues share this from what they've already said. For me, you've got the staff involved here, but this is the tip of the iceberg in the context of where the actual housing benefits department and all of these staff are going, with where universal credit is going and where government are saying TUP does not apply. So this isn't just one or two members of staff, this could be significant members of staff who are being in effect placed in this position over the coming 18 months, 2 years, where the direction of travel universal credit goes in. I would like to see HR deal with this. I know members want to deal with this, and obviously we're looking forward to the new committee structure, but somewhere, someone other than just the cabinet need to take handle on this, and we need to have member support for our staff, because at the moment I don't think that's happening. I'm not sure where that is fitting into the bit. It might well be managers managing the situation, but where are we as members taking responsibility for our staff in the context of what may well be coming down the line? This is just two members to begin with, but where do we go with the rest with all of this? Because this, for me, a report can be repeated many times over in what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, we'll see. Is there? Can I just preempt that with? Do we actually have the previous or the response we've made as a council on this, or how have we made our response?
Sorry, Jerry. We do have the response that was sent back to the DWP. I think the wider discussions around universal credit, as you say, there will be HR committee involvement, and there will be other reports that go through the cabinet when it's clearer, because on universal credit it's not clear the future role of the council. I think you're probably right in that the government's default position is that TUP, where it's dealing with staff on those functions, TUP doesn't apply. So it may well be that is an issue that occurs in the future. Should the same, I think that on universal credit there are issues around whether it's even the same type of function. So there might not even be a transfer at all. So those issues, I think, in terms of where the members come in, where members are involved through the HR committee and through the process for when the decisions around the future service are brought forward, and that would be via cabinet.
I appreciate that. Obviously it does also relate to the head of pay service and obviously all of that element. All I'm suggesting is that there should be a member involvement. I'm pleased to hear Kevin say that, because to date that commitment's not been given in that way, and I appreciate that. It is just that it is our job to support. So from my perspective, I want to see a well-detailed report. I would have liked, if you could, to share that response. If you could email it around, I'd really appreciate seeing what we sent back. And I know the unions would do as well.
Yeah, I think that was my point. It'd be helpful for, I think, members of the committee to see the response, and then from that take a view as to whether or not we should do anything as a committee to write Councillor Gardner, then Councillor Mitchell.
It's a pleasure to be in complete agreement with Councillor Harvey. I think we should make some response to back up the fact that the council does not feel that TUPE should not apply, and this committee does endorse that. But on a more basic level, on the principle that if it ain't broke, why mend it? Does the new arrangement actually give us a better service, in Kevin's opinion?
I'm going to buck that one, Chair. I don't know that in as much as that there's too many unknowns at the moment, particularly in how we will still work. There's data sharing, and there's a whole raft of issues that the principles are being accepted that there will need to be data sharing, but we don't know how that's going to work in practice. So I'm reserving my judgment on that one, Chair, if I may.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
If one had inherent faith in the government's ability to commission and implement computer systems, you would undoubtedly say that a centralisation of at least the data on this would be immensely productive, because you could use the patterning systems that are used in other contexts for fraud identification, which are not open to you because of the scale at the individual authority level. So in principle it could, if one had such faith. Just picking up on the point Paul raised, it seems interesting to me that the phrasing, I don't know whether it's us writing the phrasing or them, but the DWP has determined that will not apply to the transfer of administrative functions between public administrative authorities. Now, the way I interpret that is that equally applies to shared services. I'm confident that in doing shared services, if there's been any transfer of bodies, we've applied TUPE without thinking about it. So the interesting thing is not whether it should apply here, but whether that statement is in fact true. Will it stand up to scrutiny under law? Is the LGA challenging it at the LGA level? Is really the question. Individual authority is one thing, but it's the sort of thing the LGA should challenge, because it's a very sweeping statement. Just wanted to make one other comment by departing the scene, just to warn officers that as soon as I get a free weekend, I should be putting my attention to developing a computer system called GADARS. And what that stands for is Grocer's Apostrophe Detection and Reporting System. And I should be inflicting the result of GADARS on officers and members of this council until they stop using them. I refer, of course, to paragraph 3.3.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Can I just sort of use a terrible phrase, missing you already? That kind of feels appropriate. Thank you for that.
It is in Councillor Saunders' actions, so I'll take that role upon myself.
Thank you. Councillor Parker. Councillor Mitchell, if you could put your light off for me, please. Thank you.
Chair, I want just to say that it's I think we need just to know that we are going to have something done that's, because I again did ask, what rule is this? If they're saying the regulation states, we need to then maybe, has anybody, picking up again that Councillor Mitchell's reinforced what I first said, let's have a look at this regulation, can we? Someone wants to maybe dig that out, and then we'd be satisfied on that point. It doesn't mean we still don't continue to oppose the decision, but it's all too convenient sometimes. I mean, we get this from all of the European nonsense in relation to what our traders can and can't do, and so much of it is recommendation, and only a small aspect of it is actual law.
I'm getting the sense from the committee that firstly we need to sort of see what we've said already on this matter. Secondly, we need to see what LGA is doing on our behalf as a sort of the appropriate, perhaps, representative body. And then, subject to looking at those two, maybe to seek your permission on behalf of the committee to make an appropriate response, perhaps by letter, to both LJ and DWP, expressing our concern, as this is not just an issue in respect of this particular transfer, but what might actually be coming over the hill. So if you're content with that, I suggest that's how we proceed. Yeah. And indeed include, yes. Yeah. Okay, I'll take that point. Councillor Harvey?
Just one small point, add to that list in terms of our own relationship with our union, Unison, and also the Staff Consultative Forum in terms of, this is members of staff, so those representative bodies need to be involved in that as well.
Yeah, I think they'll be involved up to now in the process, but I think, yes, we just need to let them know that we're making this representation. And I'm happy to take that forward on behalf of the committee. Okay, if we are done with that, are we happy to note what we've seen so far?
Yes.
Thank you. That takes us on to paper F, and this is our accounting policies and changes to the statements of account. Again, changes that are being recommended to us. I think this one's yours, Dean.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Purpose of this report is twofold. Firstly, it's an early citing of our accounting policies that we will be using to prepare the accounts for 2013-14, which will be coming in draft form to this committee at the end of June and final version at the end of September. And also to note that there have been no actual changes to the accounting policies. We have revamped the format of them to try and make them easier to understand. The second purpose of the report is to give you a heads up of the main changes to the presentation of the statement of accounts that will be coming in June. Primarily the changes to the way that we account for business rates and changes to the pension disclosures. The report or the policies in the report are very technical, and I'm not expecting you to fully understand the finer points of our accounting policies. Nevertheless, the best practice says that we need to give you an early citing of those policies and an opportunity to comment on them, and it may indeed identify any training needs that we might have with some of our members before they approve the accounts. The policies themselves, they just literally set out the way that we have to account for certain items in our accounts, and we are proposing as we've done in the past, a training session for members prior to the accounts being presented to them in June. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.
There's an invitation, members. Any questions at all? Preferably on this paper. Any thoughts, questions, please? Councillor Gardner.
This is a question I've always wanted to ask.
On this paper, I hope.
Can you explain International Accounting Standard 19?
Yes, I'm assuming if you really want an answer, you can take it outside of the meeting. Are there any questions on this paper? Any comments anyone wishes to make? Yes, so I think you get a general feeling there that
So it's noted.
yes, we'll happily note it, but look forward to further training, support and explanation as we get into the next cycle. Is that okay, members? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, that takes us on to paper G. This is a self-assessment process, which is part of our good practice. And essentially what you'll see at Appendix 1, members, is a table that is already partially completed by our officer colleagues, helping us to understand elements of evidence against each of the areas of effectiveness that we are expected to demonstrate as a committee. Now, I was going to propose that perhaps the easiest way to handle this is we are really invited to run through the self-assessment, add to anything of the evidence that's already stated here, and then give ourselves a scoring. I'm looking at the clock and just wondering, is that something you wish to attempt, or is it something that you wish to feed into subsequent to this when you've had a chance to consider it, in terms of adding evidence, and perhaps allow myself and the lead officers to do the initial scoring and then share it with you by email to encourage your comment? It's kind of one of those invidious positions where we can either try and plough through it, or we can not having evidence to hand, or we can go away, think about it, and then feed in via email. Have a think on that a second, colleagues, as to whether what you wish to attempt this afternoon, or whether you wish to take it away and consider it. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I have struggled with this when first having read it, and the thing that keeps coming to my mind is outcomes. When you see under the sort of partially prepared table, it talks about examples of how the Audit Committee can add value and provide evidence of effectiveness. It's the effectiveness aspect that I'm having difficulty with, because listing just opportunities and where we've considered various reports doesn't, I think, demonstrate pretty much how effective the committee's been. I would certainly perhaps ask for further guidance in that particular aspect of what we're being tasked with.
So a good and timely prompt, because we now have Paul back with us, and perfect time to ask him to guide us on that matter before I ask Councillor Mitchell to come in. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Again, as it's a self-assessment, you've obviously made reference to the reports that you've seen, and it's in your opinion how effective you think you've acted as a committee in terms of particularly governance arrangements in the council, for example. So again, it's what you feel is the role that you've played that has been effective. So again, I know it's quite a broad comment, but it's whether maybe another way to think about it is whether there's areas for improvement. So is there anything that you've done that you think, yes, that's made a difference to, like I mentioned earlier, the governance arrangements, or you've had clarification and you've verified and you're happy with a certain situation, scenario? I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but so again, it's more on, it's your opinion.
Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I've been thinking on rather similar basis to Stuart. Under the self-evaluation examples, areas of strengths and weaknesses, we should perhaps try to inject in there some sort of note as to what happened, or an extent. So, for example, ARGA on page 2 of 3 under 5 provided internal audit support, chair's email raising issues in respect to senior management oversight, etc. That is quite effective. I mean, raising issues, but we should be able to say that we see, I mean, we have, for example, seen significant progress, as we noted at our last meeting, in many ways in the responsiveness and the number of things that get knocked off the list and those sorts of things. So we are in a position, I think, in some cases to say to what extent this is having any effect over time. And in many ways, in a sense, the overall effectiveness of ARGA is A, strategic, and B, quite long term. You know, it's not the sort of committee that makes a policy decision which is implemented on Tuesday. It's the sort of committee where you raise issues and you track them, which is what we did with those internal audit reports. We tracked them over quite a long time, and then we started to see a real turnaround in the effectiveness, which I suspect was, at least in part, the feeling that the auditors got from us, saying they're getting the backing of members to put the boot in here, putting that in, of course, much more polite terms. So, you know, that's an example of, I think, where we have been quite effective over time. But I think we need to be more explicit about that, because somebody say, how have you judged yourself 4 out of 5 on that? What's your basis? And that's what officers can't say that, I don't think, but I think we should be bold to critique ourselves in that way. To go back to your original question, I think that does need a bit more thought, but maybe a bit of bouncing around the table before we think about it, if you see what I mean. I think it's quite difficult to fill in the form in this meeting.
And that was my sense, and I think we've got a reasonably good straw man here, but we sort of need to think through what else we could add to this in terms of examples of what has and what hasn't worked. Maybe respond back amongst us in terms of email ideas, and then we can have a go at scoring and then share that with the committee. I've got, I think, Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Watts.
Thanks, Chair. We should have elections more often, you know. Peace is breaking out across the table. It's good. I agree with both Stuart and I agree with Horace. This is good. That's all right. I'm going to get yelled at for not being able to deliver this afternoon. He's got to leave this in the back of the car. The bit that struck me, just to agree with both of you, that was said so far, was that bit about where we've been active rather than effective. And I just took the word for active to be actually what the table reflected, whereas the effective bit was what you're talking about. So, you know, in that sense of what is it that we want, if we are judging ourselves, and whether Paul can guide us on this, if the judgment is, did we do things? Well, obviously the table shows us we did. If the judgment is, how well were those things done and how good did the organisation take on board what was being said, then that's a much bigger question. That takes you back to Horace's point about the strategic element. And if I understood that in my head, I guess I could answer the question you're posing of, well, what is it that we're actually auditing ourselves on? I'd prefer to do the latter, but I'm not necessarily sure that's what you're asking us to do. So that's the first point, really, just to understand that.
Thank you, Chair. Being a typical auditor, we always go for evidence first. And so that's why we try to do this. So if you can think of, if you have that evidence of what you've done, for example, for an example, this year's the first time you've received a report on fraud, for example, the proactive fraud, and that was supported in the last meeting and complemented. Once you've got that evidence, it's then able to look at it and say, okay, so did it make a difference? And maybe that's the way to maybe look at it. I appreciate that approving the audit plan and the internal audit charter are standard terms of reference items for the committee. Some people may say that you could demonstrate that makes a difference to the council or not. So, for example, if you look at the information management suggestion you've made for my audit plan, that's an example of how you've had input into the audit plan, which we believe, once we look at it, will have an effective outcome on the council, for example. So maybe start with the things that you've done, and then maybe determine whether you think it's had an effect on the council as a whole.
So yeah, just to reiterate, and again, if you take number 6 on page 52, 53 around strategic objectives, you take the Treasury, we referenced the Treasury management strategy, but again, that was a strategy that went through audit committee, went through formal committee and informal workshops, and the committee really helped shape for the council a significant change in its strategy in a risk-based way. So again, I think there is the phraseology can be developed from what we've got here. The evidence is here that you looked and you contributed to that strategy, but the outcome is a fairly, a different strategy that's been through council. So it's that sort of thing. we could boost the
strategy was changed.
Yes, yeah, the outcome was the strategy was changed, and it was the direction and how the strategy developed was influenced by discussions through with the committee.
So I think what I'm sensing is that the conversation helps us at least to understand what's required of us. We almost need to go away, look back through our copious notes and experiences over the past 12 months and think of those nuggets of where we've made a difference, or at least have set the course to make a difference over a period of time, because I certainly take Councillor Mitchell's point that actually some of the things we've been putting in place, and I use the sort of the note to SMT around audit and the fact that we call the head of property services here and got things moving on the property services database. All of those things are active changes that have made as a result of the outcome of this committee. So, yeah.
So I just add another one to that, going back to Councillor Mitchell's comment in terms of recommendations and how you've supported internal audit to ensure recommendations implemented, etc. When we had the grants to organisations report a few months back, the head of service was proactive in coming to you because they knew that you were going to challenge the outcome of the reports. So again, that's another example of how effective you've been in terms of the recommendation follow-up.
Forgive me, mischievously, that means we instill fear that they come to us before we come looking, but I take the point. It certainly helps, that sort of proactive view of reporting. Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, just as a comment on the assessment key at the back on page 53 of 53. And this reflects back to the wording again. The council is active, the committee that uses the word supporting all the time. If I were to critique this, I would say one should be doing something more than supporting changes. One should be initiating or recommending, promoting and pursuing, not just support, because it sounds as if somebody's come to us with a proposition, we've supported it. Whereas what I see our role as doing is to challenge, ask the questions. If we're happy, we press on. If we're not happy with the answer to the question, we challenge and we ask for something to be done. And that's not supporting, that's challenging and pursuing. So we should be looking to the extent to which we've successfully challenged and pursued the issues that that we raise or that are brought to us.
Are we able to change those criteria, or is it they are ours, or as much as, yeah?
It's taken from a guidance as best practice, but I'm sure that we'll change it to best suit ourselves. So it's fine. Yeah.
We can make it better practice. Okay, fine. So with that sort of guidance in mind, are we happy? Oh, Councillor Watts.
Yes, if we've got the Chairman. Well, the discussion we just had is very relevant. So we've looked at a number of examples, and there is an example raised by Paul of the head of commissioning attending Argo when I was somewhere in the sun. But above that, it says Argo has the right to call any appropriate manager, and below that, it refers to your excellent email to the strategic leadership team. Since then, we've had a reply that I regard as unsatisfactory and indicating that us contributing isn't necessarily all that needs to happen. We need to contribute to the extent that we draw a line under issues. I'd like to place it on record that I thought an email from the corporate director saying that it would be reasonable occasionally for a head of service to come here is inappropriate. In fact, this committee and its successor, I guess, only meet occasionally. And surely it's not unreasonable to expect a head of service to review and make sure that their slate is up to date with the same frequency. So firstly, I think it's unreasonable for there to be cases where no responses come. And secondly, I think it's very reasonable that in all those cases, the head of service should actually expect to come to the committee. And it's something I feel very strongly about. So when we come back to doing the detail, I think point 2 should be made more strongly, just to contribute, and then wave at the response we get is not good enough. And I hope that the corporate director will be made aware that we expect something more than occasional, but timely response.
Yes, if you have a response, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to refer back to my previous paper on the audit plan and audit charter. If you look at page 28 of 53, where I had the flow chart of reporting and monitoring. And if you look on the left-hand side, halfway down, we've got internal audit provide Argo with progress to date, etc. There's also a note underneath that says Argo has stated that they will call any relevant manager to the next available Argo meeting to explain reasons for overdue implementations, etc. That was in place last year. Again, that's in place this year, and now it's been approved. I will be sharing this with all relevant managers. So again, to reiterate, they should expect it.
And will it be accepted by the senior leadership team?
I think that I'm suggesting that there's a sort of follow-up. No, it is accepted. Maybe I know there was some comment back when we had the response to my note. I'm happy to say in light of this that I will reference this back to senior leadership team. I have no doubt that they will embrace what is intended and maybe choose their language in response more carefully next time. But Kevin, as a member here.
All I can say is, yeah, we've discussed it. It is supported by all of the heads of service. They understand the position and the part of the effectiveness of the audit committee from both from Paul and from my perspective is that profile of audit recommendations and completion has been raised corporately. So all heads of service get copied in on the reports. They're all aware of them. They all understand the comments that come back to audit. So we've had more than one discussion at SMG on this issue. So I'm comfortable that the heads of service do support the approach.
Yeah, I think the point was not necessarily heads of service. So, and that's why I'm, so that's why I will make that point. Yeah. Councillor, no, okay.
Even if you want a point, I mean, the response from SLT, not SMG.
Yes. Councillor Mitchell?
Before we close this matter, it might be helpful on the basis of not being over-congratulatory of ourselves, without having the opportunity to be challenged, if officers were to give us a little hint of any areas where they feel this committee may have been a bit more effective, where we may have have been more helpful in fixing things or moving the agenda forward or whatever. Quite difficult for us to critique ourselves because I haven't got the memory that allows me to go back and really understand all those things.
No, so it's a point well made. I'm not sure whether we can put officers on the spot here now, but I think
we can contribute to the.
So would it be reasonable to suggest maybe a week of feeding in ideas and thoughts to to myself or to the lead officers? Yeah.
Is there a schedule? Is there a deadline?
Well, I was just saying, the only reason I was trying to push this along is I think it's unreasonable of us to expect the next committee at the 30th of June to be able to sign off a self-assessment when everybody will not be part of that self-assessment. So I think we need to round it off before then. I'm very conscious of the busy period we're going into. We kind of need to agree or set ourselves some timeline for closing this down, otherwise it will slip post-May and then the next committee will be left without the benefit of our self-assessment. But happy to take views. Councillor Harvey?
I'm just thinking it through in terms of, that there's going to be some overlap, isn't there, between what the old system and the new system, no matter what happens on so many fronts. Surely it isn't beyond the wit of us to get to a stage where those of us sat around the table here are able to complete a piece of work that is nonetheless formally presented to the committee at the end of June. It may well have to be formally presented to the new committee, but it can be those members who are historic to this piece of work that contributes to the formation of that report. Surely that's doable. It's not difficult. And it will be that committee that takes it on in the future anyway, won't it, regardless of what we say or do now. And that could be left till after the election and then in the period of June running up to that committee at the end of June.
Okay, so take back to what I initially suggested was that maybe, we have a first go, and I'm quite happy to take, sort of based on the 6 or 7 additional items you've mentioned this afternoon, put that out amongst us all, and then look at it later in May when we've got a view of what we need to do to bring it to a close before the next committee in June. Yeah. Yes. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there have been, I don't think, drastic committee membership changes over the last 12 months, but there have been. And it's not necessarily just down to the members that are here today. So we've got to try and ensure that we are bringing to the attention of committee members who have either been substituted today, long-term serving members that aren't here today, for their contribution. Because otherwise they're not going to, their comments or their views aren't going to be picked up, and I think that's as essential as worrying about going into the next committee who are maybe going to be different.
Yes, happy to trawl our previous attendees list as well and make sure we got a broader view. Yes, yeah, no, perfect. Any further thoughts, members? Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. Self-assessment is all very well, but it ought to be possible for us to ask internal audit to give us a report on the effectiveness of ARGA, which would be interesting.
We noted earlier that he's short of work.
All this spare resource. But moving on, we have got the terms of reference of the new committee to look at later. And the new committee is called Audit and Accounts. Governance has disappeared. In the checklist we've got here, there's an awful lot of reference to governance. Is this a checklist which we're going to need to complete next year? And if so, how are we going to cope with governance?
And so is there a question we can answer now, or do we need to go into the...
From my understanding, although the word governance has been dropped from the title, there are still governance responsibilities for the committee, so that will remain. So, for example, your annual governance statement approval, for example. So I don't see there being any change from a governance point of view.
So members, are we content to proceed outside of this meeting and ahead of the 30th June meeting to have a go at the self-assessment involving other previous audit, governance and accounts members as well, and asking officers to give us our homework on what we could have done better as well? Okay, yeah, was that agreed? Okay, thank you. That completes our agenda for this afternoon. I would, however, encourage you all to stay with us after the meeting, and there we can deal with our terms of reference for the new committee. Nonetheless, thank you very much, and I will close this meeting formally this afternoon. Thank you.